Hello, Brian. How are you doing?
Good, thanks. How about yourself?
I'm doing really well as well. We have a very interesting topic today. I don't think a lot of people that use technology know that sometimes when they buy the technology, it's actually not the technology that the vendor sell because it's OEM by somebody else. You had a lot of practice in this space. Can you explain what OEM mean and how the vendor use this and why?
Yeah, I think it sort of varies. I mean, a lot of people the traditional OEM, they think of, I'm OEMing parts, like, Dell computers when they come out with a computer, they're not making the hard drives, they're on OEMing, IBM hard drives or Seagate, et cetera. So a lot of the historic people think about OEM more from a component perspective. But on the software side, it can be any number of things. But you typically want to do it to service a market that you wouldn't normally go after with the core company, or to service the market in a unique way. So, for example, I might want to, if I'm in a company that's going after enterprise customers, may want to take a piece of my technology, and OEM it to a partner that's going after SMB customers. They need the technology as well. My company's not going to sell to that market. We don't want to. So we'll sell to a company that specializes in going after that market. But the goal is usually to get to a new market and generate revenue.
As a vendor, what are the pros and cons to take an OEM vendor or vice versa? If I'm a vendor and I want somebody else to OEM my solution.
So, I mean, the pros and cons can again vary. You want to, one of the big things is, for example, the distraction factor. You don't want to take a piece of your technology or the entire technology and start to OEM it down a channel where all of a sudden you're spending a significant amount of time just dealing with that ecosystem. So, for example, if I take a piece of the technology, and I did this both at my last company, last line, I do this as well at where I'm at now, Constel Intelligence, and I'm taking a piece of the technology. The full solution is this. I'm taking a small piece of it and taking it to partners that are in other categories. So, for example, Constella, we do a lot with consumers. We don't sell to consumers. Now, if those partners started coming back and saying, well, now my consumers want this feature or this data, if that's not a feature that my enterprise customers want, then I have to balance putting that development, much like any feature, I have to balance that focus and that feature change for this one customer against what I'm not getting for my enterprise customers. So it's really the traditional sort of feature value prioritization issue. Now, from the flip side, it's why would you or not? Why would you or would you not want to OEM a technology into your product? And this is, I think, in some ways even more interesting. You typically, I recommend companies where, hey, if there's a feature, a data, et cetera, that you need, and it's not core to who you are as a company, if you can get it at a good price, go get it. At Last Line, for example, the company that I was with last year that sold to VMware, we had a lot of companies using our sandbox, big brand names that had firewalls, et cetera. And it wasn't core to their IP to build this sandbox. So they could get, the quote best sandbox out there for inclusion in their product and now sell that and drive revenue. So, but if it's core, if you're, for example, a firewall, you don't want to OEM core packet processing because that's sort of core to your
Yeah, it's
firewall.
super.
So
So
that's really the focus.
in this case, if I'm a customer and I buy a solution, but this solution is OEM by somebody else, I may not even know, and I call support. Do I call in support who the vendor A, that OEM vendor B, or it goes to vendor B that actually doing this, making the solution?
In most situations, you're going with the vendor you bought it from. I have seen some OEMs where, in these situations I'm about to describe, it's usually like I OEM the whole product and it's just a white label. A lot of times in that situation, you think you're calling the vendor you bought it from, but you're actually being rerouted to a white labeled call center to
Can
deal
you,
with it.
it's actually a good topic. Can you explain the difference between white label and OEM?
So, sort of white label is a subcategory. So, when you OEM a technology, especially a whole product versus a piece, you may, let's say that the product spits out a report and it has a UI. Well, that UI would normally have the logo and company branding of the company who made it. When you white label something, you change the user interface so that instead of my company's logo, et cetera, on the report, it's your company's logo. And the amount of, white labeling, customization can vary from product to product, but it's usually like a label swap out, and, find replace on the company's name and documentation, et cetera. But a lot of OEMs, since it's just a component, that doesn't factor in. But if you buy
finish.
I was going to say, but when you buy a whole product, often you don't even know. It's like, you buy a security camera from, and I'm not suggesting Google OEMs their cameras, but if you buy a security camera from Google, if they were to OEM it, they'd have you call Google and you're still getting support from Google. Now they may use tier 2, tier 3 support. They route you back to the vendor they bought it from, but you don't know that.
So as an end user, as a consumer of technology, do I care? And if I do learn that I'm buying a vendor that OEM'd by a different vendor, do I want to switch to the original vendor? Should I not switch? If I don't want to switch, what do I need to be concerned about? What questions I may want to ask to make sure I'm protected?
Yeah, good question. I think generally from, if you're a consumer buying something, you do want to know if you're getting an OEM product because sometimes that can lead to some issues. For example, people would buy an OEM version of Microsoft Windows. And an OEM version of Microsoft Windows is meant to be embedded with a new PC. So technically, you shouldn't even legally be buying it. It should come with a new PC, but it means it doesn't come with regular Windows support. It doesn't come with like the box and everything. So it depends on the solution. But if you're buying it from, a reputable player, like, again, I'll use Google as the example, you're getting it from Google. Google's an established name. They're going to support it. So I wouldn't have concerns. I think where you do need to be careful is, and I think any vendor should, when you buy something from somebody, especially on the enterprise side, you should understand if there's OEM technology. And I'll use an example. Over, I guess, about 5 years ago, a lot of people started to look at Kaspersky and say, hey, if Kaspersky's whitelist is in your product, we want it disabled because of perceptions of where, the technology comes from and the fact that they could inject something in there to allow malware. Well, that's an example where, the user, the company buying the technology should be allowed to use that. Maybe they don't care that it's Kaspersky, and others do. So in that situation, if I'm an enterprise security buyer, I want to know whether Kaspersky is part of the solution and then have the ability to turn it off or on depending on my issues.
Basically, as an end user, I can ask what are the components, and I should expect the vendor to tell me what
they may not ask you, they may not answer who, but you should push them on it. And yes, you are within your rights to ask what if any third-party technology, especially with compliance, GDPR, et cetera, out there. You really should know that.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you very much. Very good conversation. Talk to you next time.
Excellent. Talk to you later.